everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Jason Kiss. Some of you may recognize me. I was with the Department of Internal Affairs for about 6 years, working on the New Zealand government web standards, but for the past year I've been with Access Advisors, pursuing the same sorts of outcomes, but a different channel, as it were. And so while we did a session this morning and the presentation's the same, ostensibly the morning session was for government folk and this afternoon is for private sector, but we opened it up to everybody because it was just such a huge response from government. So today we have a mixture of private and public sector, so welcome to all of you. No fighting. When I talk about accessibility, I've found that often the people I'm speaking with have a broad range of different understandings about what accessibility is, who it's for, what's involved. And so sometimes, and today is one of those times, I like to go through a number of slides, just giving you a good impression of who accessibility is for and the kind of tools and technologies that people are using to interact with the web. Because ultimately, it's catering to or accommodating those users and those technologies that that accessibility is about. So, strictly speaking, just in its in a pure definition, accessibility is simply about making websites. Web accessibility is simply about making websites work for people with disabilities. So, in that sense, it's a subset of usability, right? It's usability for people with disabilities. You might think of it more broadly as part of the methodology, the design or development methodology called inclusive design or universal design. So that's an approach to design as opposed to an outcome. Accessibility is an outcome that we're looking for, and it's an outcome that inclusive design or universal design also aims for. But inclusive design is a broader methodological approach, whereas accessibility is about that ability to use it. So who uses the web? Well, all sorts of people. There are people with vision impairments, so this is a sensory perceptual disability, and we often think about blindness being the paradigmatic example of a person with disability using the web. The web's so visual. How can a blind person use the web? And so this is often that sort of disability we think about when we think about people with disabilities using the web. It's important to note that while it is it's a common disability, vision impairment. Most people with vision impairments are not blind. They have some degree of low vision. Very few people with vision impairments, relatively speaking, are fully blind. And then again, some others have varying degrees of color vision. They might have some colored vision deficiency. Similarly, in the hearing space, not everyone with a hearing impairment is deaf. Most of them have varying degrees of hearing impairments or a hard of hearing, we often say. And then again, there's also a condition called tinnitus or tinnitus. That's a ringing in your ear. So if you've ever gone to a loud rock concert and you get that buzzing in your ear, just imagine having that on and off your whole life. It can really degrade ability to focus, to concentrate, to hear. And so that's another hearing impairment. In the physical space, you'll often hear people talk about mobile disability. But really, we're talking more specifically about motor disability, and that's the ability to use your hands. Somebody with a mobility disability might be in a wheelchair, but that doesn't impact their ability to use the web or a computer. So in the case of diminished motor control, we're talking about the ability to use keyboard, input devices, mice, different sorts of things like that. And that could come just by getting older, developing conditions such as arthritis. Maybe you have more ingrained conditions like cerebral palsy or MS. You might suffer paralysis. The broadest demographic of people with disabilities is the cognitive or intellectual or learning or neurological disability space. And so that includes just a huge spectrum, ADD, ADHD, autism, Down syndrome, dyslexia, dyscalculia, which is dyslexia with numbers, right? So, and these are processing, cognitive or neurological processing issues. Memory loss, photosensitive epilepsy, or maybe you suffer some kind of traumatic brain injury. All of those, and that's again the largest group of people have those. Out of everyone with disabilities, it's people with cognitive or intellectual disabilities that make up the largest group. And then there are all those other situations where you might be de facto disabled. We often call these temporary or situational disabilities. These are disabilities that people don't often consider disabilities. So, for example, maybe you had a really great night out and you drank too much, and the next morning you're hungover. That affects you much in the way as a cognitive disability would. But perhaps you have other situations. Perhaps you just broke your arm, you broke your mouse arm, so now you have to use your left arm. Or Microsoft put out these design principles a year or two ago, a couple years ago, and their example, or one of their examples of a situational disability was a person holding a baby in their arm. So now you are one-handed effectively when you have a child in your arm, and so how do you interact with the world around you, with your environment? Because remember, that's what disability really is. It's a mismatch between the individual and the environment and its ability to accommodate their particular needs. If everybody were in wheelchairs, there would be no problem likely with wheelchair access. It's simply a matter of putting that into your environment. So it's the same thing with disability largely. So remember, the temporary or situational disability is really important because all of us will likely at some point find ourselves suffering some kind of disability, certainly as we get older. In 2013, 24% of New Zealanders self-identified as having a disability. So 1/4, that's significant. Even if you think only 10% of the population has a disability that impacts their ability to use the web, that's 10% of your potential market, right? So that, again, is not a small amount of people. But what's noticeable here, or notable rather, is that as we get older, we tend to develop disabilities. So 65 years and older, almost 60% of people 65 years or older have a disability. And that population demographic is growing at quite a significant rate. There's a 90% probability that in 2041, almost 1/4 of the population of New Zealand will be 65 and over. So the numbers of people with disabilities is just going to continue to increase, right? Certainly anybody here over 40, your eyesight, you've noticed, is diminished. And we're all going to develop some disability at some point. So there's another accessibility consultant, he talks about a selfish accessibility. So if you need a reason, other than all of those that we can talk about, just think about your future self. You're going to need some kind of accommodation for your disability in the future. So let's consider that now, get ourselves building those things into the products and services that we're delivering, and we'll be all set for ourselves when the time comes. But it's not just people with disabilities, people from other cultures, other linguistic backgrounds, different generations have different ways of responding to the world, right? And certainly responding to technology. In our culture here, green means go, green is good. In other cultures, red is good, and red means go. So you can't just rely always on one way of approaching things, thinking it's going to work for everyone. A whole bunch of different devices. People are using old smartphones. I suspect there are people out there with feature phones. There are people in the rural environment who are using dial-up still. They have maybe satellite internet, which is not reliable. Like I have ADSL out where I live up near Waikanae, and I'm probably not getting anything better than that. So there's a performance connection with accessibility at that point. Your 6 megabyte homepage with all your hero images is just not going to come through on somebody on a low bandwidth plan or dial-up. Maybe they've turned off images so that they're not downloading that stuff. In which case, if those images are important content, what accessible alternative are you providing for those individuals? Different browsers, of course, whole range of those. Different environments, texting while you're driving. Got to make texting accessible so it's easy to do while you're driving. If you're on the bus, or maybe you're at a lecture theater and you want to watch a video, captioning is great for students who don't want to pay attention to the prof. They can watch the video, sound down, read the whole thing. Great. So there's all these side effects that come along with just accommodating the needs of different people. So that's sort of the range of individuals and contexts, but there's this other much broader context critical to accessibility, and that's assistive technologies. These are the software, the hardware that people with disabilities use in order to interact with their computers, with the web, with the internet. And I'll just go through a whole bunch because my impression has been that, well, I think all these technologies are really cool, but there are things that most of us are not exposed to. The keyboard, of course, so very standard issue piece of assistive technology. Basically, it's just a input device that most people are able to manage. People with low vision might require a keyboard with larger print letters so that they can easily see them. Maybe you only have one hand that you can use. Don't worry, there's the one-handed keyboard. So this is the right-handed keyboard. And you have access to every key that you normally would have on a keyboard. There's a left-handed flavor as well, if that's the one you need. But that's a pretty neat device. A lot of people have issues with fine motor control using pointer devices. So you might opt for a trackball, which doesn't require me to use my hand so much. I could use the side of my arm. I could use any part of my body, really, to move that trackball around as a pointer device. The mouse on the right, that's a vertical mouse. The way we normally position our hand to hold a mouse is not a natural resting position for our arm. Natural resting position for our arm is on the side with your thumb pointing up. And so this mouse takes advantage of that and enables you to use your mouse with your arm in its natural resting position. I had some bad RSI, and after a month or so of using this vertical mouse, it went away. And that's after trying the left hand thing. I'll just use the left hand for a while, until I get RSI in my left hand. But the vertical mouse made a big difference to me. Again, if you can't use a typical hand-operated pointing device, you might be able to use a head wand, just a stick attached to your head. You might combine it with a special keyboard that that accepts that head wand better. Maybe you have a special little stylus on your head wand so you can interact with the touch interface. Mouse stick, same idea as the head wand, just you hold it in your mouth. And again, there's a special keyboard, a vertical keyboard, so it's easier to use with a mouse stick. And then there's button switches. These are in some ways the coolest, the simplest, and the most powerful. This is just a binary switch on off. The big red button is that one's called on the left. And again, so if you had any sort of dexterity issues, anything like that, you could be able to use a big red button. Anybody can press the big red button. Maybe I can't use my arms. Maybe I'm permanently in a wheelchair. I could have this big blue switch attached to the wheelchair, and I could be able to use my head because that's the only motion I was able to do, and I could hit that button. And with the software that comes with the button, I'm able to control the computer and do everything you can do. Sip and puff switches. The variation on the switch, instead of a push button, it's a sip and puff. You blow and suck air through a device. So that's all that's happening on the bottom. She might actually be using eye tracking software. So she's looking at the screen, and a camera is picking up where on the screen she's looking, and then she can blow and she can sip and puff and click on an element on the screen. And above, the fellow has an integrated pointer in his sip and puff machine, so he can actually move that around with his mouse and move a pointer around on the screen while he sips and puffs and interacts and executes commands that way. Let's say all you could do was blink your eye. The eye blink switch will serve your purposes. It's just a fiber optic cable, responds to a blink, and so you can then, with software, you could control a computer. Maybe you, all you have is slight motion, but controllable motion in the finger. You don't actually have to type or touch anything with a proximity switch. You just get near it with your finger or something, and just small, subtle movements will activate that switch. All these switches, from the button, the sip and puff, the what was the last one I showed? Processing. They use a variation on switch scanning software, which is just software that presents a selected row of content. So this could even be the desktop on your computer. You got icons all over. It just highlights a row, and then when you get to the row in which that item that you're interested in exists, you would hit the button, right? Then it would move through each column of content in that row. And when you get to the column that you want, you hit the button again. So in this example, I'm trying to type the letter N for Nancy. So as the scanning software goes, I hit the button here, I hit the button again, and then I hit the button again when it gets on the end. So I've typed one letter now. So that can take a long time to type my life's work. But software is a wonderful thing. You think, you know, look ahead, type ahead, auto suggest, autocomplete. Those sorts of features are just a boon for someone who is entering content or input this way, because the software will pick up what they're trying to type, and they'll just be able to, with one press, be able to type that whole word. So that sort of software is really useful. But this kind of approach, well, you know, it's laborious process to go through to type individual letters. You can see how that enables access to every aspect of the computer. So it might take somebody with a switch longer to do something if they didn't have preset commands or macros, as it were, to do things, but they can still do it. Speech or voice recognition, this is increasingly becoming popular because of things like Alexa, you know, the Amazon Echo, and so all sorts of people are interacting with the web nowadays, just voice alone. They don't even have a monitor associated with that. But Dragon Naturally Speaking is probably the voice or speech recognition software you're most familiar with or have most heard of. But Siri comes with iOS and OS X now, and Cortana on Windows. Screen magnifiers, and we'll see an example of this at some point. Some people need such extreme screen magnification because their vision is so low that they use screen magnifiers. And typically this works by providing the user an extra lens on their screen, and within that lens it's magnified a certain amount, 200 to 600% easily could be, and then they just move that lens around on the screen with their mouse pointer, or maybe they don't use a mouse, they use a keyboard, and then so they move the keyboard focus around the screen, and that lens follows their keyboard focus around on the screen. Anyway, I'll show you an example. But that's a really common tool. Screen readers, of course, not just for blind people. In fact, most people that use screen readers aren't fully blind. You could have people with cognitive or learning or reading disabilities, people for whom English in this context might be a second language, and they're using a screen reader to read through the page with them and just help them understand and interact with that page. Screen readers, they just read through all the content on the page, and at the same time, if the page is marked up properly, it'll identify the types of components on the page that it's coming across. So it'll say, this is a level 2 heading. This is a list with 3 items. This is a paragraph, and this is a button, and this is what the button is called. So you know what everything is on the page, even though you can't see it. Or if you are seeing it, you just have that extra confirmation, that extra support, helping you along in doing what you're trying to understand and accomplish. JAWS is the name of the, so it stands for Job Access with Speech. That is the most popular screen reader on Windows. It's about $1,600 New Zealand for a license. NV Access is a small company from Australia. 2 blind guys set it up probably about a decade ago now. And they created NVDA, Non-Visual Desktop Access. That's a free screen reader for Windows. It's the 2nd most popular screen reader. On iOS and Mac, you have VoiceOver, which comes with, and you actually on Android devices, you have TalkBack, so that's a screen reader built into Android devices. Windows operating system has a screen reader called Narrator, but again, it's getting better and better all the time, but it's not fully fledged enough to become your one only standalone screen reader that you use it for everything. And then carrying with that sort of marine metaphor, Orca is the screen reader that comes with GNOME Linux. Some people who are vision impaired also speak Braille. Speak Braille, that's good. Read Braille, and type Braille. And they'll use refreshable Braille displays. And they'll use these in combination with a screen reader. So everything that the screen reader is outputting is basically also getting output to the refreshable Braille display. And it's refreshable because these cells at the bottom, this is a 40-cell Braille display at the top. Each of those 40 cells represents a character, and as the screen reader is reading that through, it's pushing through to those cells, raising the pins in those cells as it goes in a refreshable fashion, all that content. So you're just constantly reading and reading, and then you're also interacting or typing Braille using the buttons. That's probably about 7,000 US for that top piece of equipment. This mobile Braille note taker on the bottom there, that's probably about 3,000 US. It's mobile, it's Bluetooth enabled, it's got a micro SD card, so you can hook it up to your smartphone, and a text comes in, and then the text will come through, and you can read it with Braille, and then you could respond to that text using your Braille device and all have it through Bluetooth with your phone. So that's pretty cool. But again, you can understand that these might be out of the reach of many people, especially people with vision impairments. The number of people with disabilities who are employed is much lesser than the people without disabilities. And so it can be often very difficult for somebody who needs a device like this to be able to afford it. So there are subsidies. But what is really good is recently a new Braille device called the Orbit has come out. It's only $700 New Zealand. So it's now an affordable Braille device. It's not as flash as these, you could argue, but it's their Bluetooth enabled micro SD card. You can use them just the same way. So given that range of individuals, that range of technologies, how do we make a website accessible so that we accommodate all of those? Well, you've all heard of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.0. That's been the de facto standard for the last decade. Well, and let's talk about a bit about WCAG and its structure. So it's called guidelines, but it's a standard. So the W3C has this language. W3C puts out recommendations. Those are its standards. The WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, it's not even a recommendation. It is a W3C recommendation, but it's called guidelines. Still, it's a standard. And within that standard, you have 4 principles organizing all of the elements in that standard. These are the core principles. Every bit of content needs to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Underneath those 4 principles are 12 guidelines, things about text alternatives. So that's your image, alt attributes, stuff like that. Time-based media, there's a video, right? Synchronized video. Distinguishable, can I see the text against the background? Navigable, can I easily get to all the different pages in a website? So a whole bunch of different guidelines there. And across those 12 guidelines, there are 61 success criteria. Again, the WCAG's word for requirement. There are 61 requirements, right? These are technology agnostic. So they're not specifically, they don't say HTML, you have to do this, or JavaScript, you have to do this, or CSS, you have to do this. They say this is the outcome you're looking for. And whatever technology you use, you have to use that technology in a way that delivers that outcome. So these success criteria or requirements are testable in that fashion, right? As outcomes, you can say, does this piece of content or this component or functionality, does it behave in this way? For example, 1.4.4 resize text says that except for captions and images of text, text can be resized without assistive technology up to 200% without loss of content or functionality. So basically what that means is that I can increase the font size of text up to 200% without losing any content. Now, and we'll revisit this later, but this doesn't say anything about scrolling. So if you've ever, for example, used a PDF on a phone, and you can't read it, it's so tiny, so you zoom in, right? You pitch to zoom, we'll cover that as well. But then you have to scroll horizontally to read. Now, does that increase or decrease the speed at which you comprehend the content, or even the quality of that comprehension? It all goes down. There's quite good studies now about that. Horizontal scrolling or vertical scrolling for content that's laid out horizontally, it's the same problem. Just readability, comprehension goes way down. So that's what that success criteria is about. Describes an outcome in non-plain language, you could say. Level AA, what's that about? Well, all the success criteria are assigned a conformance level. There are 3 conformance levels in WCAG, A, AA, AAA. In WCAG 2, it's not as clear or well defined what these conformance levels mean as it was in WCAG 1. In WCAG 1.0 is very clear. Had to do with the number of people that were affected and the degree of that impact. It's somewhat the same, but they have about 5 or 6 different criteria by which they assess a success criterion and then assign a conformance level. A, of course, is those are going to be success criteria that represent significant barriers to access. So if I fail level A success criteria, if my website fails a level A success criterion, chances are there's going to be somebody who just cannot complete the task that web page is for. Right? Level AA might be it presents a really difficult barrier, but it's not insurmountable. And then AAA, it might be just a nuisance that reduces usability for someone with a disability. Other considerations in terms of assigning performance levels include things like how testable is it? Is it easily testable? Can I use a machine to test it, or do I need an expert manual assessment? Or how likely is it that people are all going to understand what it means or interpret it properly? And so those sorts of considerations determine what performance level. You don't really have to worry about why they've decided. Unless you're into the esoterica of WCAG and accessibility, all you need to know is that the de facto international standard for accessibility is WCAG 2 level AA. So that means, since conformance levels are cumulative, that if you're aiming for conformance at WCAG 2 level AA, you are meeting all level A and AA success criteria. That's 38 in total with WCAG 2. Anybody from government here, or if you develop websites for government, you will know that WCAG 2 level A is the New Zealand government's web standard, so that's a requirement for government websites. But again, it's internationally understood as the de facto minimum accessibility requirement. So public, private, whatever you're doing, WCAG 2 level AA would be the compliance you'd be aiming for. But you'll recall that WCAG 2 came out in December of 2008, so almost 10 years. That's a while. Some things have changed. There was not the prevalence of smartphones or touch devices in 2008, or in the 10 years it took them to develop WCAG 2 up to 2008. So that's a recognized gap in WCAG 2. There's not a lot in there addressing really touch interfaces. They started talking about it in terms of mobile. They developed a mobile accessibility task force, but that task force is really focused on the touch interactions, because it's not screen size anymore. It's not device size so much anymore. You have Surface Pros, which are touch screens. You can get desktop size monitors that are touch screens. You can have somebody with a keyboard plugged into their iPhone, and they're now navigating their iPhone with a keyboard. Right? So you have all of those different combinations, and it's not just desktop is mouse and keyboard, no touch screen, and mobile is touch. You have every combination of input and screen type, device size now. They also identified gaps around low vision, so there wasn't a lot in WCAG 2 around accommodating individuals who have needs for text size to change, for spacing to change, for text to reflow differently so that they can read it at a size that suits them. Equally, there's a big gap around cognitive or intellectual disabilities. Not a lot of success criteria to address issues for that largest demographic of individuals with disabilities. And so, after years of deliberation, but many fewer years that it took to get WCAG 2 out the door, they came out with WCAG 2.1 just a couple months ago. In WCAG 2.1, there's one new guideline. That's 2.5 input modalities. Make it easier for users to operate functionality through various inputs beyond keyboard. And we'll look at those in detail, the success criteria under that new guideline. There are 4 new success criteria under that guideline. But altogether, there are 17 new success criteria across all 3 conformance levels. There's 5 new SCs, success criteria or requirements at level A, 7 at AA, and 5 at AAA. You recall, we're not doing AAA. We're only doing AA, which means all A and AA. So we've got 12 new success criteria to address when we're doing accessibility. When we're considering accessibility, if we're looking to meet WCAG 2.1, we've got 50 success criteria now, right? 38 plus. Looking at the first success criteria in terms of ordering, these fall under guideline 1.3 adaptable. create content that can be presented in different ways, for example, a simpler layout, without losing information or structure. So we have two success criteria there, 134, orientation, and 135, identify input purposes. Notice they're both double A. So 134, orientation, pretty easy to understand. Just looking at the text of the success criterion itself. Content does not restrict its view and operation to a single display orientation, such as portrait or landscape, unless a specific display orientation is essential. Examples where a particular display orientation may be essential are a bank check, a piano application, slides for a projector or television, or virtual reality content where binary display orientation is not applicable. Right, so there's mud. What does this mean? It simply means that your site should work and appear properly in a functional fashion whether your device is presented in portrait mode or landscape mode. So you know, you turn your device on its side, the website should turn and should still be usable in that mode. Right? This is an issue because, for example, you may have your tablet permanently affixed to your wheelchair. And if your website, like maybe I have my tablet permanently affixed to my wheelchair in landscape mode, and you've permanently locked your website to only ever be displayed in portrait mode. I'm going to do a lot of this in my wheelchair trying to read that content, right? So you prevented me from interacting with that web page probably. The nice thing about this one is if you don't do anything, if you develop your responsive website, you get all this for free. Right? You have to do something special in a web context in order to lock orientation. So simply just don't do anything special to lock orientation and you'll be fine. It'll just work. Right? Oh, and thinking about exceptions, and there's this common sort of exception in WCAG success criteria about unless the thing you're not supposed to do is an essential characteristic of the thing you're doing. So in this example, with this success criterion, we had the piano as an example. So think of an app where you have a piano app where you can actually type little keys on the piano, right? Putting those into portrait mode is not really a viable approach because now you have 88 keys in your little portrait mode where they're made for landscape mode. So you could consider that an essential characteristic. That landscape orientation is an essential characteristic of a piano app, right? Or maybe your bank allows you to submit checks with a photo. And so again, portrait versus landscape, checks have a certain orientation, they have a landscape orientation. That's essential to the check, right? As a physical artifact. So that orientation could be essential in that condition. 135, identify input purpose. The purpose of each input field collecting information about the user can be programmatically determined when the input field serves a purpose identified in the input purposes for user interface components section, and the content is implemented using technologies with support for identifying the expected meaning for form input data. So we're talking about HTML because we're talking about the web. But what is this input purposes for user interface components section? Well, I'm sure that most of you have gone to fill out forms and your browser has popped up this autofill stuff, right? It says, oh, I'm going to help you out. The browser's just figured this out through heuristics. It's looked at the form labels, and it made a best guess based on that form label as to what that input is for, right? In most cases, it's going to be clear, first name, last name, so it knows, and then it autofills, that sort of thing. But it's just it's best guess, right? It's educated guess. It's Chrome, it's Google, so it's well-educated guess, but it's still a guess. It's not a absolutely machine reliable. They could interpret it incorrectly. However, there is this list of input purposes for UI components, for inputs, and it might grow over time, but this is a list of, we call these tokens. They're set individual tokens. It's a predefined list of input types. So basically, the rule that 135 is setting, that if you have a form and you have an input collecting any one of those types of personal information, name, family name, honorific, address, CC, right? Credit card, name, number, expiry, CSC, the secret code, all these things, a transaction amount. If you're collecting any of that information, you need to programmatically, and when I say the word programmatically, I mean make it available to software or machine readable. So that's basically making it clear in the HTML markup so that a machine that parses or consumes that markup can make a decision, a reliable decision. You need to programmatically identify this input purpose as being the one for that particular input. So for example, if I've got an input looking for the family name and the surname, what I use is the autocomplete attribute. This is the only way to do this right now. So this is what that success criterion effectively means. With most success criteria, there's often a range of different techniques you can apply to meet that outcome. But in this case, right now in HTML, the only way is to use the autocomplete attribute and use the appropriate token from that list with the relevant input. So autocomplete equals family name, because I'm looking for the surname or family name in that case. Credit card number, CC-number is the value for my autocomplete attribute. Quite simple. So it's complicated initially to hear it, but to meet it, it's quite simple. Just tell your developers, here's this list, and maybe you just identify those items, those inputs that you're requesting that come off of that list of tokens. Any questions so far? Great. On to the next guideline, 1.4, distinguishable, which is about making it easier for users to see and hear content, including separating foreground from background. We have 4 new success criteria. The first one is 1.4.10, reflow. So you'll recall that the example of the success criterion from WCAG 2, we talked about resize text, which is about increasing the size of text up to 200% without loss of content or functionality. This is similar. Basically, we want to enable individuals the ability to zoom in to content so that once they've zoomed in and their content is basically taking up 320 CSS pixels, I'll show you what this means, I can still read all of that and I don't have to scroll horizontally, except for parts of the content which require 2-dimensional layout for usage or meaning. So let's look at some examples. And I've got 2 government web pages I'm going to look at. I went looking for a few private sector pages that would serve as proper examples, but I couldn't find one that, I could find lots that did it correctly. But I found one government web page that didn't do it correctly, and that's the DIA homepage. So let's say this is 1280 pixels wide, right? That's pretty typical now, desktop monitor dimension. If I zoom in to this page to 400%, can I read all the content without horizontally scrolling? No, I cannot. So this is an example of an unresponsive website, right? I can't see all of the content there without scrolling horizontally. So that's a fail with that success criteria. The 320 CSS pixels, if you think of this as being 1280 CSS pixels, or 1280 pixels, if I zoom in 400%, this is now effectively 320 pixels, right? 1/4 of 1280. So that's what that means. I need to be able to zoom into a page to the point where I've got an effective viewport of 320 pixels, which was selected, of course, because that was the size of the initial smartphones, 320, and be able to read all the content without having to scroll horizontally, right? And in this case, there's no problem. I can't. There's nothing to the right. There's no scrolling. Can I see all the content? Yeah, there's some overlapping there, right? Oops, I didn't mean to click. It's an accidental activation. So there's interesting. We refresh the page, and that issue is not there. So that means that that has something to do with the way the media queries are interacting on the page, and something missed. We scroll down, we continue to see everything's fine. There's there's some more content being cut off. It's just the descenders. Is it out of pass or a fail? That's a gray area. You get to decide that. This is just an effect of having set a specific height on that container, so that as the text increased, the container didn't increase accordingly. But for the most part, that small matter aside, this is a perfect example of a pass for that success criterion. I've zoomed in to 400%, and I've got an effective width of 320 CSS pixels, and I can read all the content, interact with it, and I don't have to scroll horizontally. Perfect. And if you build your responsive websites now, that's the way they work, right? I mean, go to any responsive website and just start increasing the text size of the fonts, the zoom, and you will see it'll eventually kick in and you'll get the mobile view, right? Single column mobile view, likely with the hamburger menu. That's what we saw with the MD example. The exception, parts of the content which require two-dimensional layout for usage or meaning. Think of Google Maps. If you had to make sure it didn't have horizontal scrolling when you zoomed in, that's going to be pretty useless, isn't it? So I'm going to have to, well, you're never ever going to be able to see more than that small portion of the map, because you can't horizontally scroll to get to the stuff to the east or the west, assuming a north-south orientation. 1.4.11 non-text contrast. So this is new, but long awaited. The visual presentation of the following have a contrast ratio of at least 3:1 against adjacent colors. User interface components, so visual information required to identify a user interface component and its state. Think of hover or focus states. And graphical objects, parts of graphics required to understand the content. Again, except for parts of the content, I did this last time. That's the exception for the previous success criterion, not for this one. This has exceptions around, again, things like logos and whatnot. But this is long awaited because WCAG 2 had success criterion 143, which was about minimum contrast, but for text, right? So only text had to have a sufficient contrast against its background. 141 covers all these other UI components. Buttons, icons. We use a lot of icons now for interactive components. You've always got your social media links, your Facebook F and your Twitter bird. Those icons are often that's all you get is the F and the bird, and that's your control. If the contrast of that control against the background is not sufficient, it'll be hard for someone to identify what it is and thereby reliably know what to do with it. This success criterion covers all that other stuff, which is great. Finally, we have we could never fail it before. Now we can fail it, and rightly so. Also charts and graphs, right, where color is used. So here's an example chart. All these different lines. You'll notice they all have these little node markers, and that might be a diamond or a square or a triangle or an X or a star. And of course, they have those because one WCAG success criterion is about not relying on color alone, right? Because if you were colorblind and those little node markers weren't there, all I'd have was a bunch of lines of different shades of gray, perhaps, and I'd be unable to distinguish them. So we have these additional markers. So now we're no longer relying on color alone. But what we additionally have to ensure is that the contrast between those little node markers, those graphical icons, is at least 3:1 against the background, which in this case is white, right? So anybody guess at which one of those doesn't? There's only one that doesn't meet the 3:1. Any guesses?
Purple one.
Purple one?
The bottom one.
No? Purple one meets it? It's a little difficult too, mainly because maybe the washed out screen a little bit. The green. So the green one has a contrast ratio of like 2.4 to 1. So it's not that far off, but it's still off. And similarly, up top we have a button. The button in its default state on the left is just a word, right? It doesn't have any other markers. That was just a design decision. But when it gets focused, when I tab to it using a keyboard, I get a focus rectangle, and that rectangle has a 3:1 contrast ratio against the background. Again, we never needed to have that before. that could have been the lightest, most subtle gray that anybody over 40 could not see, but it would still pass WCAG and we couldn't fail it, right? But now we can fail it, which is good.
Nice.
Yes?
Is there a minimum width of that block?
Nope. Nope. Yes, well, the nice thing about W3C and WCAG, all the W3C's work now happens on GitHub. And so you can feel free to sign in and raise an issue. Yes?
The color contrast. Did that take into account at all the like we've got a screen that we use for meetings at work and color grading and balance on it just has the terrible improvements around green. I'm just wondering if that sort of thinking.
No, they don't. So yeah, accounting for device fidelity and that sort of thing is probably there's nothing they ever manage. No, and that's why those shouldn't matter. So we talk about color contrast. It's not color contrast. It's luminosity or brightness contrast. And so regardless of the quality of your monitor or your screen, the luminosity difference between foreground, background, or whatever it is should still come through. Here's another example. So on the top again, here's the sorts of, we've got fancy pastel links or buttons to network social media sites, but really hard to see. The pastel color has a low contrast against the white background, but as well, even within the link, the identifying aspects, for example, the Facebook F or the Twitter bird inside doesn't have, it's the same ratio, right? It's still white to that blue or white to that teal, or whatever that is. And so that's why in the corrected example, not only have we outlined the boundary of the object with the outside, we've had to identify the component in the middle, because without it, I could not identify the function of that button. I'd be able to say, yes, that's a button, and that's its boundary, its outer boundary, but what it's a button for, I don't know, because I can't see what's inside. So I've had to also identify with some colored inside, be able to distinguish that. Questions? 1.4.12, text spacing and content implemented using markup languages, so again, HTML for us, that support the following text style properties, HTML does. No loss of content or functionality occurs by setting all of the following and by changing no other style property. So basically, this is looking at a web page, can we modify the line height of text so that it's at least 1.5 times the size of the font, spacing between paragraphs to at least 2 times the font size, letter spacing 0.12 times the font size, and word spacing, space between words, to 1.6 times the font size, and then still have all the content and functionality on the page remain there usable. How do you test that? Fortunately, there's a handy text spacing bookmarklet. Everyone knows what a bookmarklet is? A bookmarklet is just a small snippet of JavaScript, basically, that you put into your bookmarks toolbar, and when you click on it, it executes that JavaScript on the current page you're looking at. So we'll look at that. So there's a text, if you just Google text spacing bookmarklet, you'll find that you'll get a page like this, and then you can just, the nice thing, you can also just drag the bookmarklet up to your toolbar. I've done this a few times now. I've got 3 of them. And then you just run it. So let's look at the MD homepage again, because it's a website. And we just go there and I click on my text spacing bookmarklet, and it automatically sets all those 4 text properties, text style properties. So now I can just look through the web page for any content that's no longer there or that's occluded, or any functionality that is now gone. I look at it, it all looks fine. I mean, you can see the letters are spaced out, the words are spaced out, there's greater space between paragraphs now. See, there again, we have a sort of an issue, right? A little bit of cutoff's not so bad. Here, we've actually lost a whole line of content. So that's a definite failure at that point. Again, it's not as severe as losing a piece of a page, but that certainly impacts comprehension. So I would call that a failure. If that's the only thing you have to fix on your website, then great. You know, if you have a whole bunch of stuff to fix on your website, that might be deprioritized, depending on what the other stuff is. But that's really easy to do now, and the whole reason for this is just to support low vision users who have a need to be able to change these text characteristics, which they might do through a custom user style sheet. So I can write my own CSS style sheet, put it in a special folder, and have the browser apply it to every single web page I go to, so that every H1 is now hot pink and flashing. Right? I could do that. That's technically advanced customization, but there are bookmarks, sort of plugins now that will enable you to change these sorts of things on your website. So people are going to be able to start taking advantage of these kinds of custom personalizations. One 1.4.13, content on hover or focus, another AA success criterion. When receiving, or where receiving and then removing pointer hover or keyboard focus, so where we hover over something and then remove hover, or if we move focus, keyboard focus to something and then keep tabbing and remove focus from that thing, where doing that triggers additional content to become visible and then disappear, the following are true. So think of tooltips, right? A custom tooltip, you hover over something and a little bit of content shows up on top of it, right? Where that happens, that additional content needs to be dismissible. There needs to be a mechanism by which I can get rid of that additional tooltip, let's call it, without moving my mouse or moving focus, keyboard focus. If hover triggers the content, I need to be able to move my mouse cursor off of the trigger onto that new tooltip presented content without the content disappearing. And I'll show you why. And then thirdly, it needs to be persistent. That content needs to stay visible until the trigger is removed, or I've dismissed it, or it's no longer valid. So, and note that what's covered by the success criterion are things like custom tooltips, submenus, even a drop-down menu from a navigation menu, or other non-modal pop-ups. We won't get into modal versus non-modal. What's not covered, and this is critical, is the browser-provided tooltips that it grabs from the title attribute. So in HTML, there's a title attribute. You can put that on any element. It provides supplemental information, or that's what it's supposed to do. Browsers typically present that as a tooltip when you mouse over the element. Typically, except for in Edge, it's not available to keyboard users, and you have no control over it anyway. So you can't be expected to apply the success criterion to that feature, which is provided by your browser. So don't worry about that. But let's look at some examples. So here's an example. When I hover over here on that question mark, this tooltip comes up oddly. So here's, what is the greatest secret known to man? You can't really see that. That's that small little title attribute provided tooltip provided by the browser. You can't do anything about that. And it just disappeared on its own. This other custom tooltip is author provided. So it's totally custom. And you'll see what happens is I can mouse to there, but I can't mouse onto that content. It disappears. I can mouse, get this content. If I hit escape, can I get rid of it? Yes, so they've implemented that properly. It's dismissible, and I haven't had to move my mouse or my keyboard focus. Can I tab to it? Tab to it, and it shows up. That's great. And I can hit escape, and it disappears. Cool. So what happens if, for example, I'm using a screen magnifier? We're zoomed right in here. I come over here. Let's zoom out a little bit. So I'll keep zooming. Right. So then I see, I hover over there, and a tooltip pops up. No. Oh, sorry, I had a button pressed. We'll do this again. There's a tooltip, right? But I can't see it. So I'm going to move my lens, my screen. Oh, it disappears. Try again. No, it disappears. So that's not good. right? I can't ever, if I'm a screen magnifier user, I can't access that tooltip. Let's look at a different one. So here we have a bunch of tooltips. Again, same sort of thing, right? I can hover over these, they show up. But interestingly, I can move my mouse over that one, right? So that's great. So if I am zoomed in again, I can come over here, show me another tooltip, and I can actually then read the whole tooltip using my lens. I can also be using a screen magnifier and have it tab. See, it follows focus, but again, I can't see that tooltip, so I need to be able to move over. Can I get rid of the tooltip? Yes, by hitting escape. So that's what happened there. So in this one, I can not escape when I'm using the mouse. It doesn't work to escape the tooltip. Interestingly, though, if I use tab and then it shows me the tooltip, I can use escape. So they've implemented. So both of these examples are half implemented, right? One of them's got certain conditions fulfilled, and the other has the rest of the conditions fulfilled. If we put them together, you'd have an ideal situation. But that's all that means, right? Fortunately, there's technology, ARIA, which provides for some additional functionality or features with tooltips. So you can create your own custom tooltips. It's really easy. You should do that if you are producing tooltips. Don't rely on the title attribute for the reasons I said. Is that it's not accessible to a large number of individuals. On to the next guideline, 2.1, keyboard accessible. Make all functionality available from a keyboard. So this one's existed for a long time, but this has a new success criterion. 2.1.4, character key shortcuts. So this is not about access keys, which you may have heard of. Access keys you can put into your website. Most cases you probably won't ever need them, but they involve, like you could set up an access key so that if I hit, and they always work with key combinations, right? So I'd have to hit like Control plus number 2, and that might take me to the search page of my website. But don't use access keys. Character key shortcuts might also be implemented using single character keys, right? So in Gmail, for example, there's all sorts of single letter keys that you can use to archive emails, to navigate down to the next email, to open a new email and reply to me. You can do all these things just by pressing individual keys. So if such keyboard shortcuts are implemented, single key shortcuts, one of the following is true. You can either turn them off somehow, or you can remap them so that they require multiple keyboard combinations, or you can remap them to non-printable keyboard characters like Control or Alt, or they're active only on focus. Only when my keyboard focus is on the element related to that single key shortcut will that single key shortcut actually respond. Now, this is actually quite critical for a number of people. For keyboard-only users with dexterity challenges, you might accidentally hit a key, right? So if you accidentally hit a key to delete an email, well, that's not great. Or archive, maybe because delete brings up a prompt. Are you sure you want to delete this email? Which was great. But maybe if you just archive it, it doesn't. So if you're prone to accidentally hitting keys, this is a good one. But more importantly, I think, for speech recognition users, it's quite interesting, this use case. Speech recognition users, they'll have their speech recognition software running, and let's say a user named Kim is working in Gmail, and someone walks into her cubicle and says, "Hey, Kim," and now the speech recognition has heard the letter like Y and K and M, and what it does is first it navigates down an email, and then it archives because it uses the letter K for archiving, and then it uses the M to open up a new message or something like that, right? And you didn't ask for any of that to happen, but just by overhearing some language and picking up some letters, the speech recognition software has run a whole bunch of commands for you because of these single letter commands, right? So to avoid that possibility, you need to make sure that you can turn it off or remap them. Input modalities. This is the new guideline. Make it easier for users to operate functionality through various inputs beyond keyboard. And there are 4 success criteria, all level A. So these are important ones. 2.5.1, pointer gestures. All functionality that uses multi-point, many points, think multiple fingers, or path-based gestures for operations. So think about moving your finger around in a particular pattern on the screen. All functionality that uses multi-point or path-based gestures for operation can be operated with a single pointer. So think of one finger without a path-based gesture, unless a multi-point or path-based gesture is essential, right? So let's not worry about exceptions, but think about single pointer. So a single pointer is your finger, it's your mouse, right? And with a single pointer, you can tap, double tap, tap and hold. You can even do like just single directional gestures that are path-based, right? That's important. Because if I can't accomplish those multi-point gestures because they're complicated for my fingers to maneuver, or maybe conversely, what's the converse of that? Oh, right, I might have, I just might not have the ability to use a path-based gesture or manage a directional series of vectors on the screen. You need to provide alternatives. Right? So think about Google Maps. I've got a little trackpad on my MacBook, so I can do the whole pinch and zoom thing, right? But if I couldn't do that, I also have these buttons, these UI components that I can use a single pointer gesture or tap, right? To zoom in, to zoom out. I even have another single pointer gesture, which is the double tap and zoom in, which you can do on your phones as well when you touch interfaces, right? So there, Google Maps has provided two different ways for me to zoom to activate that control that they've provided this multi-point gesture for. So again, that's all that is. This is going to be trickier to test. If you don't have any communication with the designers, developers, how are you going to know if an app has some kind of multi-point or path-based gesture involved? It's going to be tricky to find that out. Presumably, there would be some kind of indication or help text. I mean, users aren't going to know either, are they? So there's going to be some kind of instructions on that regard. But basically, it's just about, again, making it easier for everyone to manage. So any complex interactions get reduced to single point. And it's not about not having those. Pinch to zoom is great. It's just about supplementing those for other use cases, right? Pointer cancellation. This one is a doozy. For functionality that can be operated using a single pointer, single finger think, at least one of the following is true. There's no down event. So when you click a mouse button or you press your finger on an interface, there's a couple of events that are going on. There's the down event, right? So the browser records the down event when you press down or you click. And then when you release the mouse button or you lift your finger, the browser records a up event. Right? So there's two separate events. So for functionality that can be operated using a single pointer, at least one of the following is true. It doesn't happen. The command or the action is not executed on the down event. Or if it is, completion of the function is on the up event, and a mechanism is available to abort the function before you do that. So that's actually the scenario we're going to look at in a second. Up reversal, if I do something on the down event, I remove my finger or I remove remove the mouse button, release the mouse button. That up event cancels what I did previously on the down event. And then unless completing the function on the down event is essential. So, for example, I'm just going to, and you've all done this, I'm sure, you've accidentally pressed on a button that you didn't want to press. I just guess I hold my finger here now until I don't know when. But for example, say I accidentally clicked on this button down the bottom right to move to the next slide, and I pressed, wait a second, it's not time to go to the next slide yet. How do I stop? I just drag it off and then release, right? That's a built in. So again, unless, and the on-click event, if all you're worrying about is the on-click event, all that always happens on the up, right? It doesn't happen on the down, because that's exactly what we've done here. If there's an on-click event on this button, I click down, it goes, oh, the down event has happened, I'm not doing anything on the down event. That's cool, I'll do it on the up event. Then I move it, and the up event happens, but I'm no longer on that element, so it cancels. So that's great. And that's, again, just to avoid possibility of accidentally hitting keys, right? Remember the example from the previous one with the piano and landscape, right? Piano was okay. You could have landscape orientation locked if you're having a piano app. Similarly, if you've made a piano app here, you're probably going to want to have the piano key strike sound on the down event, right? Have you ever played a piano and had the sound come when you lift your finger? It doesn't work. So here's an essential example, an example of where having the function on the down event is essential. A piano app, for example. Or whack-a-mole would be another example, right? You had a game of whack-a-mole, you whack the mole, and then you remove your hand. Anyway, those are kind of examples. 2.5.3, label and name. For user interface components with labels that include text or images of text, the name contains the text that is presented visually. And note, a best practice is to have the text of the label at the start of the name. Label, name, what does that mean? Good question. So let's talk about labels versus accessible names. So label is text that is presented to all users. So think of a link. The text that is in the link, that is its label, but it's also its accessible name. It's what the browser exposes as the programmatic or machine readable or software readable name by which that link will be identified by software. That's its accessible name. So in that case, they're the same, because the link text is visually presented, but it's also used in the calculation of that UI component's accessible name. Same thing with a button. Think of a form label. So I might have an input, and next to it I have a form label. That form label is just text. It's just a label. Visually, it's a label. It serves as text for that, to label that input. That text is available to everyone. Blind users get it through the screen reader. Sighted users can see it. But it might just be text sitting there on the page next to an input. There might be no programmatic or machine readable relationship between those two pieces of content on the page. So in that context, the input might have a label that visually presented text, but it doesn't have an accessible name because that label has not been programmatically associated with that form input to serve as its machine readable accessible name. In HTML, we have a number of ways we can provide components accessible names. So again, for things like a link, the text in the link is the accessible name by default. But I could also put an attribute on the link element. There's an attribute called aria label. And I could put aria label equals whatever. And that becomes the accessible name for that link. So the visually presented text, which is its label, no longer matches the programmatic accessible name for that link, which is provided by this visually hidden aria label attribute. So now they're not the same. And that's a problem because people who use screen readers, they hear the accessible name. The screen reader identifies the component to the individuals using the accessible name. So again, that's an issue because a blind screen reader user, they may not know any different. They're going to hear the accessible name. They're not going to know the link text is different. So when they're talking on the phone to somebody and some person says, oh, go down to that link named X, and they'll say, I don't know that link exists because it's called Y. Or a sighted person using the screen reader who's using it to help their comprehension interaction with the page, they're going to hear it, and the screen reader is going to call that link something else when it's clearly named this, right, visually. So you don't want a mismatch between those. It's not always avoidable, but it's critical. I'm going to show a video here, 3-minute video from a speech recognition user, which shows this in detail and explains it really well. So I'm going to try this. Hey, good, it's working now. So let me go back, full screen.
Turned it into a 2-step process. So here I am on VA.gov, the official homepage of the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. On the web, my intention is still expressed as say what I see, But the biggest difference between working on a website and working in a desktop application is on the web, I don't need to say the entire accessible name of something. Rather, I can just say the word click, followed by any word in the accessible name to interact with it. So what do I want to do on this page? Well, my attention is drawn to the big red submit button to the right of the carousel. Speaking only for myself here, if you put a carousel on your page, I will ignore it. So the submit button is part of the stay connected with VA form that's asking for an email address. So let's go ahead and give the VA my email address. Wake up. Click email address.
It gets focus.
Work email. Click submit. What's going on here? I said click submit, and rather than clicking the submit button, drag and put a tiny number 2 in the top left-hand corner of the submit button. Number 1 is over the search button in the top right-hand corner of the page. So that tells me that dragging detects 2 things on this page with the word submit in the accessible name. Where's that coming from? Well, watch what happens when I inspect this control. Go to sleep.
He's open at the dev tools and he's looking at this particular element in the HTML. Search button.
After inspecting this control, we can see that it's not a button. If this search button had a role of button and name of search, then its function and purpose would be clear. But instead, this is an input type of image. And with input type image, Dragon's going to pull the accessible name from the alt text. The alt text here is click here to submit your search. So the word submit is in the accessible name. That's obviously redundant. Here, by including redundant information in the alt text, not only did the developer create extra noise for a screen reader user, but for speech recognition users, they've taken what should be a one-step process, clicking the submit button, and turned it into a two-step process.
Everyone understand what happened there?
Turned it into a two-step process.
So we're seeing a lot more use of ARIA label, and we see that a lot, especially on icon buttons, for example. So again, the Facebook and the Twitter and the LinkedIn icons, that's your only control or link or button to that. There's no visual text, right? Sometimes they use actual images, in which case you could have an alt attribute, but sometimes it's just an icon font. Most of the times these days, it's just an icon font. And so it's CSS pseudo content, basically. It's not even real content. It's in the content added via CSS, and it's not a meaningful name at all. It's a private range Unicode character that doesn't get announced. So the accessible name, in fact, is nothing. So what we do is we say, well, you got to provide an accessible name. We'll use ARIA label, because you don't want the design doesn't allow for a visual label. So we need to provide a programmatic accessible name, at least, so it can be identified by the software. So we use ARIA label, and you put ARIA label equals Facebook, or find us on Facebook, or ARIA label equals Twitter, right? And that's fine. And then a speech recognition user would see the Twitter icon and say, click Twitter, right? And chances are that's the only one. The important thing there is, let's say we had a control on a page where there was a visual label. For example, that search button. The word search, the visual label needs to be in the accessible name, right? So that when I do target it, when I do say it, it'll come up. It might actually present me with a number of options for which ones to click, but at least it'll be included in that option, because what it's telling me by the visual label is what it's called. And what that what it's called needs to be actually part of its accessible name. So everybody, whether I'm using assistive technology or just looking at it, has access to the same component via a name that is consistent. This is the last one under 2.5, that new guideline, motion actuation. Functionality that can be operated by device motion or user motion can also be operated by user interface components, and responding to the motion can be disabled to prevent accidental actuation, except when the motion is used to operate functionality through an accessibility supported interface. Don't worry about that. The motion is essential for the function, and doing so would invalidate the activity. Again, those would be probably narrow use cases where there's an exception. But basically, this is just about device motion, right? Shaking your phone. If you shake your phone, if you've typed in a text in iOS and then you shake your phone before you send it, it'll say undo typing, right? Then you get to then undo your typing if you have that motion actuation on. Obviously, we need to be able to turn this off, right? Because what if I have tremors? I'm always undoing all of my typing, right? Or the device or the web app, for example, there are some image viewers where you tilt the phone to the right and it'll move to the next image, and you tilt it to the left, it'll move back previous image, right? If that's the main way for using the app, and I don't have that kind of motor control and mobility, then I can't use your app. So you need to provide alternatives in that case, right? So that's the can be operated by user interface components. I need a forward and a back button as well, in addition to being able to use the device motion. So pretty straightforward, that one. Looking at the last one now, which is under guideline 4.1, compatible, maximize compatibility with current and future user agents, including assistive technologies. So the previous two success criteria under this guideline are 4.1.1 parsing, which is about valid HTML, let's say. Not exactly that, but that's more or less what it is. And 4.1.2 name role value, which is about when you're building custom interactive widgets out of divs and spans, which don't have any semantic meaning themselves, or you need to provide programmatically all this additional information about what the thing is. So if you build a button out of a div, you need to provide additional markup so that it is exposed to machines as a button, right? And that it responds to keyboard as a button would respond to keyboard. So that's what the whole 4.1 compatible is about. And under 4.1, we have 4.1.3 status messages. In content implemented using markup languages, status messages can be programmatically determined through role or properties such that they can be presented to the user by system technologies without receiving focus. So sometimes you're doing things on a website and little messages pop up, and then they disappear, right? You see them because you cite it, but focus doesn't move to them. I mean, the app doesn't all of a sudden move keyboard focus, for example, to that status message, and then move keyboard focus back to wherever it was. Those status messages just show up and then they disappear. You're shopping online and you press buy, and it comes up and it says has successfully been added to your shopping cart, right? And you say, great, good, I can continue shopping now. If you're blind, you may never even know anything has happened when you click. And so maybe you just keep clicking it, thinking something's going to now have bought 5 kuni. And what you need to do instead is make sure that that message is programmatically exposed. Now, this doesn't mean moving focus again. We don't want to take the user's focus away from where they are just to alert them as to this little status message, right? I mean, it's the kind of message where for sighted users even, we barely wanted to disrupt them. We just wanted to let them know and then take it away, right? Let them get on with it. So it's the same sort of thing with all users. You don't want to move all of their attention to that thing and then move it back. Those are called changes of context, and they're highly disruptive to users, except when they're expected. Like when I click a link to go to a new page, I expect a change of context, right? But if I'm just doing something and a status message occurs, I don't expect to be moved over there and then lose everything I was doing. But I do want to be informed. So with ARIA, that's easy. There's something called live regions, ARIA live regions, and this is just an easy technology where you can inject little messages into these containers that are ARIA live regions, and they'll automatically get announced by a screen reader. So all of a sudden, it's really handy. So, for example, let's look at this. So this is just a simple example of a busy or loading status message. So you see it all the time, especially in SPAs, right? Single page applications. Maybe you're filling multiple pages of forms. And on the first page, you fill out the form, you click next. There's not an actual server round trip. You're not getting a new page served, but the whole page is basically updated with new content through a dynamic updating. You click next. It takes a while for that dynamic updating to happen. There's a little busy sign that comes up and lets you know that the app is working, and that's good. That's reassuring, right? And you can see that and say, oh, it's just, I'll wait. But again, if you're blind, you click something and nothing happens. There's no announcement. There's no indication that the app is working. You're wondering what's going on. Maybe you click next again, but you don't want to be in that situation. So we can use ARIA Live regions. And in this example, we're just going to show how nice an experience that could be for a screen reader user. So I'm going to turn on VoiceOver.
VoiceOver on Safari. Loading.
So I'll just navigate through the page here.
In loading progress indicator demo. Web content. Heading level 1. Loading step.
If you've never heard a screen reader before, it's kind of fun. So you heard heading level 1, right? So loading progress. In loading progress indicator demo, which is the title of the page, that's the title element. First thing screen readers read. So having a unique title element for every single page on your website, really critical, helps orient users. It's the first thing that screen reader reads out. Tells them what page they're on. Every page has the same title. They don't know what the page they're on. It's also useful for people who want to go use their back button, right? Because the title is what's listed in the back, right? And in this one, we won't.
Google Chrome. WCAG menu. 18
that's
items.
Not a very helpful.
You are currently in.
That's because of the way the slides are. But that's not very helpful. Every single page in my slide has the same title because it's one big page, right? But if those were all each individually unique title elements, I know exactly where I want to go.
Closing menu. Safari. Loading progress indicator demo. Window. Heading level 1. Loading status message. You are.
Level 1, loading status message.
Load a new component button.
It told us what it is, and it told it what its accessible name is. It also happens to be the same as its label. So now I'm just going to press this button.
Relax while we load a new component for you. Play with the new component button.
Cool. So what happened there? We loaded a little GIF into the ARIA Live region. That GIF had a alt attribute of relax while we load the new component for you. So screen readers or people that are getting the alt attribute are actually getting a nicer experience than the sighted users who only see the word loading. So that's nice for them. And then it's gone and we move focus to the new component. So now we've followed up with a change of context. I don't need an additional message here to say you are now on the play with new component button, because that's provided just simply by moving focus there. A change of context reorients the whole user's relationship with the content on the page. So we can just do this all day.
Relax while we load the new component for you. Play with the new component button.
So it's really good. Now I know where I'm at. I was relaxing while it loaded. I was comfortable because I knew it was loading. They told me. And now I can play with the new component immediately. It tells me I'm on a button, and that's the name of the button. So away we go. So really simple. If that wasn't there, you can imagine if you couldn't see the screen, you'd be wondering what's happening.
Play with the new component button. F5 button. VoiceOver off.
So that's the last of the 12 new success criteria. So we've obviously got a lot more to do than we used to before under WCAG 2, right? And I was going to say, don't hold this against WCAG 2.1. People often, bemoan WCAG, all this accessibility stuff. Now I got to meet this accessibility standard, WCAG 2, all these success criteria, all these requirements is all this additional work. But now I've got to do 2.1 with 12 extra success criteria. Right? They're not doing anything but trying to help us, really. because we want to support the users that are coming to our sites, potentially coming to our sites, and accommodating the technologies that they're using and the new behaviors that they've developed by using these technologies. So WCAG 2.1 is just there to help us learn how to accommodate those users and the devices that they're using today. So you should start, by all means, now. I would say don't wait for the new, if you're government, don't wait for the new web accessibility standard. There's no reason you can't start with WCAG 2 right now. Integrate this stuff into your design, your maintenance, your development life cycles, and get going on now, because WCAG 2.1 is backwards compatible with WCAG 2. So if you meet WCAG 2.1, you've met WCAG 2.0. So you've met your standard. You've just done extra, right? And extra for whom? For your users. And not only just, well, the users, but also the devices they're using, the scenarios in which they're using those devices, and the way they're using those devices. They're meeting the needs of a whole bunch of other people that you may not have considered as users before, but their numbers are only increasing, right? That demographic only increases, especially as the population ages. So yeah, my recommendation is just to get on that now. It's going to be way more difficult. We've been, for the last 10 years, we've all been dealing with accessibility at the ass end of the project, to be frank, right? And it's difficult, it's costly, causes a lot of pain for everybody involved. That's only going to be more difficult, more painful and costly with WCAG 2.1 if we wait till the end, because you just have that much more to address, right? And again, that's because of the devices and the technologies and the ways people are using the web, right? And as Phil mentioned at the very beginning, the legislative environment is changing. So it could very well be in 3 to 5 years that there's a formal piece of legislation that explicitly requires accessibility on the web. Right now, we're simply doing it because it's against the law to discriminate in the provision of services on the basis of disability, right? So the Human Rights Act, it requires us to do all of this. But it's not expressly it doesn't expressly identify accessibility and web accessibility per se. So a lot of other countries have got express anti-discrimination or accessibility legislation. So it'd be nice when New Zealand is able to do that as well. And if you want help on any of those topics, Access advisors here. Any questions? The slides will be made available afterwards. So there's that. If you, yeah.
Sorry.
No.
In terms of a company, you know, going through the steps to make things accessible, and they think they've got a handle of it, before they go to the next step, how much should they be doing the testing with their own networks, with getting, you know, people to actually sort of, you know, work it through? Like one of the challenges I find as somebody who's got sensory issues is banners that scroll, that the speed is wrong, that, you know, there's lots of those visual sort of things, and it's like the text may be perfectly fine, but if the visuals aren't, so that's something that if I'm working as a contractor with a company, I'll give them that feedback instantly. But it's like,
but you get that otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, by all means, as part of any design development process, I would say some degree of even informal guerrilla, as we used to call it, testing, it makes sense and continues to make sense. It's important to recognize the value of that kind of testing. It's not statistically representative testing, but it's indicative testing, and so it can help a lot in that sense. And then after that, I mean, unless you have expertise in-house, I think you're looking at expertise outside to help you. And it doesn't have to be a fully comprehensive WCAG assessment, you know, crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's. That's something that can be done. But there's also the potential for an accessibility expert to come in and give you sort of just a high-profile review, identifying all the major issues. If there are a lot of major issues, that's sometimes the best place to start. Or if someone does that sort of more superficial type of review and finds hardly anything, that's a very good sign that you're on the track. But I think you can do a lot of that internally to begin with. but it's a matter of building those steps explicitly into your processes. And that's where we fall down most of the time, integrating that stuff with our processes from project management, who the project managers need to be across that and figure out that they need to make sure that all of their staff are going to be touching on accessibility when they need to, that they get the training they need to, that the project is getting that attention from the accessibility perspective. And then through the development, the design, the IA, every aspect has some degree of responsibility for addressing the accessibility. I don't know, did I answer your question at all?
It's an ongoing discussion.
Sure.
And certainly I would sort of say that if an internal user sort of says, oh, I'm not comfortable or I can't put my foot on, you know, it's like, it might actually be one of those things of saying, hey, it'd be good to get some experts to give an overview. So,
Good point.
I find trying to plow through the actual guidelines really, really difficult. And,
Me too.
do you know if anybody out there is going to make them in some kind of plain language?
Yeah.
Use?
It's the greatest irony of WCAG. There are the understanding documents associated with those, and those can be helpful. I would say that they probably also are not written in the most accessible language. There are some. We're suffering the same problem we've suffered the whole time in the accessibility community, is that everybody is writing their own interpretations of these success criteria, trying to put them into plain language and what they mean. That's really great, except they're all over the place and there's no central location. There's no central authoritative location for that kind of, here's the plain language view of WCAG. The other problem is that because these are technical outcome testable requirements, they need to be written in a way that they cover all possible scenarios. And that's why they're written in this horrible fashion. Because they actually do, for the ones that are written really well, they do reflect the outcome regardless of technology or instance, right? And that we're looking for. It's just they are not easy to understand for the person that's just trying to get their head around it and need it. So yes, people are working on that. No, I don't have a single source that I can provide for that.
Interpretable by someone like me, then I could spread the word to more. But like, well, I just go, well, how do we do it?
We work at that, trying to train up individuals inside agencies and organizations, and that we get the best success when we're actually working on them on an actual piece of code or product or something for the web, where we can actually see it in practice, and that tends to be the best way to understand it. And so here's what you've got. This is why it doesn't work for this person, this person, this person, and this technology. And this is what we do to fix it. And this is what that really means.
Well, I found this session really helpful. You have a guideline out there.
What does that mean?
You explained it, which is really helpful. If we had more of that, that would be really useful.
Well, we might write up some of this. Publish it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
I got through one yesterday from 4 syllables, which I haven't tried to use, but it seems pretty readable.
Yep.
4
syllables.
4 syllables.
Yep.
And
They're based in Australia, I think. Yeah, so it's Day Alexander's outfit. And so they do a lot of accessibility work. Generally, they're very strong on the content accessibility front. So if you're a content author, you should check out 4 syllables. They've got a good alt text decision tree. They've got a bunch of great courses and resources for accessibility.
And WebAIM also has.
And WebAIM, yeah, I was going to mention that earlier. Yes, WebAIM has checklists. They'll have plain language. They also have one of the greatest resources out there. It's an email list, but it's the WebAIM, WEBAIM email list, and sign up for that. You might want to set up some email filters because they can get quite verbose. But if you just sort of hang out and read that stuff every now and then. It's really great. The exchanges are between people from every level of expertise, from the people from WCAG working group. So 135, identify input purposes. Remember, if you're collecting in a form information about a specific type of personal information, like name, address, credit card number, you have to use the autocomplete attribute. Turns out that even some top-notch experts did not understand the wording of that success criterion and misinterpreted it. And then it took a fellow from the WCAG, a very verbose fellow from the WCAG working group, to go on at length about what it meant and indeed what its intention was. And at the end of it, you learn a lot if you took the time to read it. And you understand that, yeah, that success criterion isn't worded exactly like I think they should have. It doesn't mean what they say they think it means, but you learn what they say they thought it meant. So you learn their intention behind the success criterion, and you learn how to implement it. And currently, the only way to do that is with the autocomplete attribute. But web email list, yeah, I can't recommend that enough. That's a great one. And you should feel free to submit questions to that too. It's a very great environment. Yes.
You've done any research or like
it's mostly anecdotal.
It's the anecdotal, our experience, our lived experience of it, and what we're seeing. So, and I said a year ago, we've had 120 people register to come through this room today, and we've got another 50 registered in fact, another 80 registered in Auckland, because we moved a firm out to a private session because they were filling up our public sessions. So we moved them out and said, look, we'll do one for you privately. So we've got another 80 people. So that's 200 people that have, and I feel that if we'd done this this time last year, we wouldn't have had that. There does seem to be a changing of the tide, and it may come down to things like the social movements. I mean, there's a lot of sort of social responsibility at play within society at the moment. Latest one's probably plastic bags. That was a non-event last year. This year it's got a massive rolling momentum, and I just feel like with accessibility, and Tanya's been out speaking a lot with organisations as well, what we're hearing is there's a real willingness and desire to move forward on this. So it's not just web accessibility, it's everything. It's probably the perfect segue for me to sort of look at closing out the session. And so I just wanted to revisit a couple of the things that we said towards the start, just to put it into perspective, and why, really, it's about the people. That's the long and short of it. We're about making it work for as many people as we possibly can. A reminder, 1 in 4 New Zealanders, about 1.1 million people identify as having a disability. That's probably low, as Jason said, because they've got to self-identify. And that probably doesn't take into account temporary disabilities and things like that. What about the 45% of people who have a disability are employed versus 72% of everyone else? Those stats just don't work. So what we're doing here is about trying to make it, we've got to change, and this is me talking from some of the overall view of why Access Advisors came into existence. We need to start changing at many different levels, and one of the levels is about getting people just to think about it, just built into the mindset, built in there, and going on from there. So those statistics are a little bit old now. They're from the Disability in the Labour Market and 2013 survey. So they may have shifted a little bit, but they still hold largely true. To talk about, and just to quote a bit from the fantastic guys here at InternetNZ and their recent paper that they did on solving the digital divides, they identified 7 risk areas of people who aren't engaging with the internet. These are where they're at high risk of not wanting to engage and not wanting to use, and that is such a limiting factor for society these days. If anyone's interested, I know there's some books about this paper that they've released, or you can go onto InternetNZ's website. But the interesting thing for people with a disability or people with disabilities is we have a high representation. We have 100% hit rate in disabilities, but going apart from that, we actually see a higher percentage in the seniors, in the low socioeconomic, cause and effect type things going on here, Maori and Pacifica, and of course 100% hit rate in disabilities. So we see that increase, and so what we're doing by trying to address this, InternetNZ talk about 4 areas that need to be focused on. Access. Now we're in the middle of doing the great big rollout and of ultra-fast broadband across and the Rural Broadband Initiative, all of that. So it's access and cost. Is it going to be affordable? But then the other 3 are motivation, capability, and trust. And really, WCAG actually addresses many of that sort of areas, or makes it easier for them to get the capability to access the content. It helps them feel motivated because they'll start to see the ways that that can benefit them and what that can do. And trust is that it will work for them. They actually just want to trust that when they go on a website, it's going to work. And that's, so just bringing it back to sort of the people. And so, yeah, I had said it's motivation and trust that we're really working on here. But also driving back that accessible equals a better experience for everyone. It's not just for people with a disability. So now I'm going to do my little sales pitch. So please bear with me. I'll keep it as painless as possible. We are run from the profits that we make, so we've got to actually, in order to keep going, we've got to sell our consultancy and things. So you've got to bear with me. In short, and I twisted these as I put them up on there. And I've focused them on the web accessibility point of view. We actually help organisations through their complete journey. So not just on web accessibility, but through, and on the quiet, we're in the middle of setting up a program that would be similar to a Rainbow Tech or a Women in the Workplace or Pay Equity, etc., to give positive affirmation to organisations that are taking this journey. But in regards to accessibility consulting, one of the things that Jason was just talking about was that consulting over the project lifecycle. We've really set that up with the DIA and their program of work with the Tiara Manaki, and we're finding Jason's in there a half a day a week. And it's putting him in amongst the developers, in amongst the team, in amongst the thing that keeps accessibility front of mind. It gives the developers confidence that when they need an expert available to them, they know that he'll be in on Thursday morning. All of that type of stuff in achieving it is actually really working very well. We have an accessibility user testing panel. So we've got about 35 people registered to this panel with various disabilities. I'd be lying to say we're not blind and low vision reg, but we have some other disabilities in there as well, who are chomping at the bit to actually work with you and to look at what you're producing and provide you that real world feedback. It's not going to be, as Jason was saying, that representative set of the population and everything else like that, but these are real people looking at it and telling you, I could do this or I couldn't. I set them a time limit. I say, if you can't do a task in sort of 15 minutes, where most of us would be able to do it in 2 or 3, stop, because we don't need you to keep going. That probably means that you're having to work around too much and you would have given up in real life. Accessibility assessments. If assessments is what you want, that's what we can do. So we can do that. And we do that, and we build that in as a final check, as actually sort of knowing what's going on. But if you wait till the end and say, can you assess us against where we're up to, you're not always going to like what we say. Because if we come back and say, here's your long list of things that you need to correct, then it's going to get written into user stories and put into the backlog, and half of them will never get implemented, and you'll think that they're too expensive and too two things, and they sort of just get deprioritized. Where if we build it in and we're working up front with you, we can avoid so much of that. Accessibility training coaching. So Jason was talking about that before, and that's really with the Tiara Manaki. We're actually working with the developers. We're making them better developers so that they'll need us less in the long term. And that's where, so we can move on and work with the next team. So the concept is that we get alongside, we sit with them when they've got a particular question, we work with them, train them, coach them. We can do sessions as well. We do training sessions and custom-made training sessions depending on the needs of the organisation, sessions similar to this, you name it. But we also do that one-to-one coaching, which is probably the most effective way. So, yeah, I said before, and I've jumped around, but we are a pan-disability accessibility solutions provider. And we just want to help organisations be more accessible. So, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. If you do need our support, or you would be interested in our support, Tanya sitting out in the foyer out there, or myself or Jason, catch up with us. We'll send out at the end of this. I have been videoing the presentation as well, so we'll actually touch to that. But we'll email all of you with a copy of the slides and the video, etc., so that you will be able to. We'll choose the best of the videos. We videoed this morning as well, so we're going to choose the best when we get there. But you'll get a video session that's very similar to this.
I do just want to say, I noticed that some people didn't tick the box for emailing you. So if you didn't tick the box, we will not email you. We will not legally be able to email you with any other invitations to things or the slides or anything. So if you want that,
we can email the slides on the back of this one.
But nothing in the future.
But
so,
that would be the last.
So if you want to revisit that and tick the box if you would like to feature invitation from us.
But thank you very much. And as I said at the start, but I'll say now, huge thank you to InternetNZ. They've been a huge support in giving us the venue, the coffee, just helping us advertise and get this out. I know that some of you have come through Meetup, some of you come through our comms, some of you have come through InternetNZ's comms. So that's been really appreciated, and we've really sort of we've been developing this close relationship with them. And yeah, thank you to Jason for what he did. And most importantly, a huge thank you to all of you for just being interested and really coming along and sitting here today and listening. So thank you.